The time has finally come to animate our squirrel character. The first thing to do is to play the Squirrel rig UI.py script. It will enable our rig layer and we will be able to hide bone groups easily. We can duplicate our keying set action and create a new action that we call 01 run cycle. And then double check our preferences by going into the edit menu in the top bar, preferences, animation, and check that the only insert available is on. It will override our usual automatic keying set, making sure that we don't have any key that will be written if there is not an existing keyframe. If I move this knee joint tweaker controller, you can see that the auto keying is on, but Blender is only recording and writing location keyframe for this controller. This way our action editor is clean in the keying, but on top of this we can still use a specific keying set. And I will enable the whole character keying set. This way, when I press the I key to insert a keyframe, Blender will key all the controllers of my character. And this is done on top of the only available option we have set in the preferences. When we were blocking the bouncing ball animation, I advised you to key all the controllers. And here is the reason why. I will rapidly block out a turn with a change of foot position. Our little friend is rotating his body to look to the right and is also moving his feet accordingly. During most of the animation, his right front foot stays on the ground and it switches position only on the very last frame. Here I've done the blocking of those three poses, only keying the controllers I'm using. It looks great in step mode, but as soon as I will switch to spline, the right front foot will be interpolating from the very first frame to the last. And it doesn't look good at all, and I will have to move the keyframe, insert new keyframe, etc. While if I insert a keyframe on the whole character on each main poses, I will get a better behavior and the right front foot will only move from frame 20 to frame 30. So you may think this is not a big deal, but believe me, if you have this kind of problem on the whole character on every leg, this is going to be a pain. And if you have the same issue with all the controller, the head, the hips, that's gonna be a nightmare. So key all your controllers during the blocking stage. The second step is to study references. You will find a link to this one in the documentation. It's very important to watch as much reference as possible, and honestly nowadays it's not that complicated with YouTube to find good references of animals. I guess you already know what I'm going to show here is that the body of the squirrel is like the bouncing ball, squashed when it's on the ground, and as soon as it's going in the air, it is stretching. Basically, the chest of the creature is arriving first and then the hips are catching up. So when preparing an animation, you have to make this work of seeing the character as a whole piece. Look at the curve that make the body, for example. Once you have the broad details, you have to go for the smaller detail. Look how the front feet arrive at a separated time. It's just 1 or 2 frames of difference, but it will make your animation way better than if both ends arrive at the same time. In animation, when we get something symmetrical or something occurring at the same time, we call this twinning. And this is something you should always avoid unless it is done on purpose. If you do the Hulk smashing the ground with both his hands, you want both to hit the ground at the same time. It will communicate impact and strength. But in the case of our squirrel, look at how breaking the symmetry looks way more natural. On the left, the character looks stiff, on the right, it looks way better. So don't forget to avoid twinning, both in timing and in shape, and let's get started. I don't know how many frames I will need to block or how long will be the jump, but I will start by aligning the feet with the ground. One cool feature is that once I position one of the foot, I can select it and press Ctrl+C to copy its pose. And you will get a copied pose to buffer message in the footer of Blender. If I now press Ctrl+Shift+V, I will paste the mirrored pose automatically on the other foot. This is a shortcut I'm going to use a lot. From there, I will start posing the pushing pose when our character is preparing to jump. So I have my reference image on a second screen, so I invite you to have it always open and try to find the frame where the squirrel is preparing to jump. His body should be very squashed and the root of the torso almost horizontal with the ground. Starting with the back legs, I'm slightly rotating the foot toward the outside of the body. This way, I'm breaking the symmetry both from the side view and the front view. Then I will move its front feet right in between the back feet. I'm also breaking the symmetry, having one of the front leg slightly more forward than the other, one slightly more raised than the other. Then we need to squash the whole body by rotating the chest controller and the hips controller. You can also slightly move them toward the center of gravity of the character. Just think of your character as a box, and this box has to contain the heaviest part of the character, the chest and the hips. The head and the tail counterbalance each other, and if we draw a straight line in the middle of this box, we can see that our feet are more or less framing this contact point between the vertical line and the ground, offering a balanced pose to our character. When blocking a character, you should always start with the most extreme position. So I will now block the airborne position. I start by moving the root controller by half of the length of the jump. In this case, I've moved it by 30 cm forward. And then I will use the torso controller to raise the character. In most cases, you will use the root controller only to move your character on the Y and X axis. When I do a run or walk cycle, I generally deal with it without moving the root bone, as if the character was on a treadmill. But it's a bit harder to read the shape of the jump. So during the blocking stage, we will use what we call root motion. And when the animation will be finished, we will get rid of this root motion so that our character will be jumping without moving forward. This way it's gonna be way easier to use it as a run cycle, and we will just have to move the root bone wherever we want in our scene. Don't worry if you don't get it right now, we will do it together later on. Back to our air pose, you can see that I've slightly stretched the body. So I've cancelled the rotation on the hips and the chest, and then I'm resetting them by hand. So this is something I advise you to do when you don't have a major change in the pose. You select the hips and the chest controller and press Alt-R and Alt-G to get rid of any rotation that was recorded on the previous pose. And then you create the new pose yourself. Blocking a new pose from a neutral one will push you to correctly look at your reference and force you to work on the shape of the new one. The back legs are pointing toward their starting point, while the front legs are pushing forward to pull the whole body in the air. Both the front and back feet are currently pointing inward. It preserves balance and aerodynamism to the character. You can use the pull target and the rotation controller to fix the elbow and the knees of your character. Don't forget to scrub between your first and second pose to kind of feel the motion, the movement. Then, to improve the pose, I will stretch my character even more and realign a bit the hips and the tail. During the blocking stage, figuring the overlapping motion of the tail is pretty hard. That's why I'm just working with the very first controller of the tail. We can work on the follow-through of the tail while detailing the blocking or even during the polishing of the animation. To finish the blocking of those extreme poses, I will have to guess the landing position. On the air extreme pose, I will set the root bone position to -0.3, and I will duplicate all the keys on frame 0 and move them on frame 10. Since the airborne root position on the y-axis was -0.3, I will set the landing at -0.6. 2 times further. Now I scrub through the keyframe to feel the motion, and I feel it should be a little further. So I just need to select the root bone, and on frame 5 I will try a minus 0.4. And now I feel like I need to tweak a bit this pose to make the character a little more horizontal. So this is something important. Don't hesitate to revise your blocking. The blocking stage is the most important stage. And if you don't do it properly, if you don't spend the time now, you will suffer even more during the polishing stage. I can now push my root bone to the position minus 0.8 on the landing frame. And now it feels like the squirrel is jumping too far away from me. So I will try to find an in-between with minus 0.35 and minus 0.7. Compared to the reference, our squirrel is making pretty large jump to move forward. But animation is not necessarily about copying the reality, it's exaggeration. And this will lead us to appeal. It's a bit like making a caricature of motion. When you do a caricature, you try to find the cool feature of the face and exaggerate them. We are doing the same here with motion. In the next video, we will start adding breakdowns to detail the blocking animation of our character.